Welcome to Life After, a podcast for women to take you from feeling like you're just surviving to thriving, to creating a life you really love. Expect to discover tips and tricks to get there. Each episode will have actionable steps to empower you to make changes. I started this podcast because I've been through it all, from getting out of a marriage with a narcissist to completely rebuilding my life. And now I'm on a mission to help you too. You can change your life. It's absolutely possible. Hello, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. In this episode of Life After, from surviving to thriving, we are going to talk about how to build momentum without the pressure that we so often add on or impose on ourselves. Now, this might seem like kind of a funny, and when I mean funny, I don't mean ha-ha funny. I mean odd funny. It might seem like a funny topic. Now, that said, I think that this can be a big part of our mindset when we are actively making shifts in our lives, to consider that using momentum, and we'll talk about adding in motivation in just a few minutes, how much easier that can move us through life over putting the constant pressure to meet our expectations of how we think things should go. I want to be really clear, because what I'm not saying is that momentum without pressure sounds so simple and easy. I just said it should be easier, right? Because it challenges that thought that we take away the pressure, challenges the way that so many of us have been taught to make progress in life. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Push harder, set bigger goals, be more disciplined, don't let up. Or the more common 2026 version of this, hustle, hustle, hustle. The hustle culture. Momentum and pressure are just simply not the same thing. And yes, we can use pressure. We can put pressure on ourselves or others. Anybody have one of those kind of bosses in the past? We can use pressure to get us moving. And in my experience, that moves us temporarily. Momentum is what, and again, we'll talk how that intersects with motivation here in just a second, but that's what makes continuing on the path that we want to be on easier, using momentum and motivation. What is momentum without pressure or stress? Many of us want to move forward in our lives. We want to make changes. And we also don't want everything to just seem like one more homework assignment. And I think that a lot of us, me included, right? I'm talking to myself here. We learned to use pressure as our primary source of motivation. So, again, does this resonate with anyone? You ever said to yourself, I should be further along. I need to get this done. Or maybe, why haven't I figured this out yet? Or I said I was going to do this, so I have to do it, or I should do it. Or there's always the comparison game when we're trying to motivate ourselves in a way that sometimes doesn't feel good, right? Everybody else is better, faster, smarter, thinner, better off, more financially secure than I am. And again, sometimes those motivations create some momentum and work for us in the short run. Pressure it can absolutely create action in the short run. The problem is that putting pressure on ourselves or someone else, is expensive. What does that mean? It means it costs us so much in terms of time and energy and sometimes money, right? Sometimes we think we have the opportunity to buy forward movement. And of course, in this moment, the only example I can think of is buying Facebook ads, where you are going to move yourself forward in getting exposure or attention or growing your business by buying people's attention, right? It's expensive. Putting pressure on ourselves or others is expensive. And again, pressure can create some urgency. It's temporary, though. And in addition to those front end costs of time and energy and sometimes money, there are the added side effects or back end costs of creating more anxiety in our lives. Oh my gosh, trying to be more perfectionist, putting things off, procrastination and avoidance. It can cause us to be resentful. And ultimately, putting that much pressure on ourselves or someone else, talking to all you bosses out there, it's eventually going to lead to burnout for all of us. Oh my gosh. It's a lot of pressure just to even say all that out loud. To talk about the truth of it. Seems like a whole lot of pain for little to no gain. Now, momentum without the pressure works differently. So pressure says to us, you need to do more, go more, do more, work harder. And momentum whispers in our ear, keep moving. Now, we can interpret that to mean to hear that with the feeling of pressure, or we can choose instead to look at it as momentum not necessarily meaning move quickly. It means that we can create enough forward movement that the next action becomes just a little bit easier. Think about pushing something really heavy. The hardest part is getting it moving in the first place. And then once it's moving and you get that momentum, you don't need the same amount of force to keep it going. Our lives 100% can work in the same way. And I know this because I just recently read the book. Actually, it's called a monograph. The title is A Monograph to Accompany the Book Good to Great by Jim Collins. That's the subtitle. The title is called Turning the Flywheel. Now, I have just discovered Jim Collins in the last probably year. He's a fantastic author. Good to Great is one of his most well-known books. And in this monograph, I'd actually never heard that word before. He actually has more than one monograph. I read the first one about 6 months ago. And he talks about this flywheel concept. Now, in this book, he's referencing what a flywheel looks like in businesses. We can still translate it to our own lives, though, to our personal lives. And the general idea is what I just said. It takes a lot of momentum to get something started. And each successful turn of the flywheel gets easier and easier. That's his premise and the research he has to back it up. Now, I like to describe this concept of the flywheel in a slightly different way. I came up with this idea many years ago when I first built life skills, my life skills program. And I look at it as the motivation and momentum cycle. Now, I have tried, trust me, I have tried and tried and tried to come up with a catchy phrase for this motivation momentum cycle, and I've never been successful to do so. So if you have a moment of just sheer brilliance and you have an idea for what to call it, please reach out to me and let me know. Here's what it means to me. That when we want to do something new and we have interest in doing something new, we have some motivation to start that thing. And once we do it the first time, then we get a little momentum because we've taken that first action. And so then that momentum carries us forward and we've gotten a little bit of a positive result. So we're more motivated to try it again. And when we try it again, we create more of that momentum so that we end up having this. I look at it almost in an infinity shape. Wow, say that 10 times fast, where the motivation and the momentum are just moving through the infinity shape again and again and again. And when I visualize it, I see it as that process happening more quickly so that the more motivation you have, the more momentum you get, the faster your motivation builds. Now, obviously, for anyone out there that has ever had a New Year's resolution, obviously this can go sideways, right? Obviously, there are definitely chinks in the armor potentially that can cause us to stop that cycle. In my experience, in working towards trying to make major changes in my life and in the lives of my clients and the people that I've helped, I see where this motivation momentum cycle really works when you're intentional and you're focusing on it and you want to make a change around it. Right? And we can look at momentum in those small, consistent actions. So, for example, it's making one decision that you've been avoiding, having one difficult conversation, right? It can be taking one walk. It can be sending one email. It can be putting if you're trying to build your finances, putting $5 or $10 or $25 towards whatever your financial goal is, a vacation fund, a savings fund. This one, I absolutely love the concept of the next one I'm going to say, which is spending 10 minutes. I would recommend 15, working on something that matters to you. Just spend 10 or 15 minutes. Set a timer. Set a timer for 10 minutes and see how long you end up working because you have the momentum of starting and you realize in 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, oh, this feels good. I like it. Builds motivation. Makes you want to do it more, builds your momentum. There are a couple other ways that we can really use the benefit of momentum in our lives without putting pressure on ourselves. So, anybody ever wanted to say no when they normally would have said yes? Man, I've done all these things and I've so been in that one. Or maybe you've shifted something, done something different in a relationship, right? There are all these ways in our lives that momentum can show up. And through the pattern of the motivation cycle, I use them interchangeably. Sometimes I do momentum first, sometimes I do motivation first, right? Doing that cycle really can help us move forward and get the results in our lives that we want. Now, beware, please, because I've done this too. Remember, I've made every mistake you can make at least twice. Sometimes we risk turning momentum into, following our perfectionist tendencies. And what this looks like is, oh, I was doing so great. I had my streak going for 5 days and then I missed a day or I missed 2 days or I missed 3 days. So I've lost all my momentum. We're thinking this in our head, right? I can't do it anymore. Now, this shows up, I think, more commonly in I missed one day. I missed one meal. I had a cheat meal. I missed one attempt and I've lost all my momentum, right? Particularly as adults, we have a tendency to forget what learning curve is like. And that's why I'm really inviting you to consider intentionally what this motivation momentum cycle looks like. Because if you stick with it and you give yourself grace around the learning curve of it, that's the natural extension of it, you can get back on track. None of us is perfect. None of us does things perfectly. This is the grand and glorious part of being human. And so you're going to miss a step here and there. And the more that we can, instead of expecting ourselves to be perfect, the more we can look at that and go, oh, okay, I missed that thing. I'm going to get back on track now. I'm not going to wait till tomorrow. I'm not going to wait for 3 days from now. I'm not going to tell myself I can't do it at all. I'm just simply going to get back on track at the next meal, the next workout, the next practice. We absolutely have some control around that. Have a lot of control around that, actually. Right? We don't have to see it as I've lost all my momentum. When we choose to look instead and accept and acknowledge and give ourselves grace for being human, the fact that we know we're going to falter while learning something new, I like to call that failing forward instead of failing. Somehow that always makes me feel better. We can shift our mindset. And instead of saying, I've lost it, I can't do it anymore, we can remind ourselves we've just had a pause. We've just had a moment. We can come back. And that shifts from, instead of saying, now I'm never going to get there. It's never going to work. It's done. I'm done. And we all have some form of this language in our head, right? What does yours sound like specifically? I ask you that question and I invite you to take a moment to really think about what the language in your head is when you decide my momentum shot, I didn't do it perfectly, I can't move forward anymore. Because if you know that language, then when it shows up, you can pattern interrupt it. You can blunt that thought and pattern interrupt it. And here's the thing. I promise you all out there, between lived experience and professional experience, I promise you, I am not Pollyanna. I do not see life as, oh, it's so perfect. Everything is so great. Right? That's not how I'm trying to present the world. And yet I will tell you with absolute certainty, we can always recover. We can always recover from that pause. We can always decide and choose what our next step is going to be. Are we going to get back on our motivation momentum loop? Our ability to restart, to recognize that we're failing forward, is a part of that motivation momentum cycle. I promise you I'm not Pollyanna. I invite you to consider that and then try it for yourself. See what happens when you opt to change the language in your head, pattern interrupt, blunt those thoughts that you don't want, know them ahead of time and blunt them, and see how that changes your results when you're building that momentum. Because here's the thing, and oh man, this is so me. This is so me. What I'm about to say next is so me. Somewhere along the line, we learned or we were taught, if I'm not hard on myself, I won't get anything done. I won't do it. I'll have no interest. Ugh. Oh my gosh. That was an awful sound. It's so painful to say that out loud. If I'm not hard on myself, I won't get anything done. It is so painful to say that out loud because I have spent so much of my life with this belief. And it's an interesting belief. And by interesting, I mean sucky. That's a technical term for those of you out there unaware. It is a sucky belief. We think that criticism keeps us accountable. We think that deadlines are going to create discipline, self-imposed deadlines, no less. We think that making ourselves feel guilty or someone else making us feel guilty is finally going to make us change. And sometimes the pressure that we put on ourselves when in those circumstances becomes especially intense when we're trying to do something that we think is really valuable or important, like making big changes in our lives, right? It looks like I'm finally going to start exercising. I'm going to start that business. I'm going to leave the toxic narcissistic relationship. Oh, and now that I've left the toxic narcissistic relationship, I'm going to start dating again. And oh, by the way, all the while I'm doing all that, I'm going to save money. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to get another job. I'm going to get organized. If I just get organized, it will solve all of these problems and I can do all of these things. And then, because we're human, we start saying to ourselves, well, I can do that really quickly. I can lose 30 pounds in 2 weeks. I can meet my soulmate in 4 dates. Oh, I'll start a business. That'll be super quick. That won't take any time at all. And then we give up at the first sign of resistance or adversity or obstacles, whatever you want to look at it like. It doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to move through our lives putting pressure on ourselves and stressing ourselves out to get things done. We just simply don't have to do that. And sometimes what that looks like is we feel like we have to feel motivated before we act, right? That belief is so common that it sabotages us. Because in reality, the way this works is we take a baby action, we take a baby step. And let me tell you, I've learned over time that first baby step is the absolute hardest step to take. If you feel resistance and you're not sure, know that the first step, getting on the motivation momentum cycle, the first step, taking that first action is the hardest. And then when we finally do it, we get a little evidence. Oh, I feel better. I went on a walk. Oh, look, I've saved $100 before I knew it. Oh, I wrote 3 chapters. We get a little bit of evidence. Or maybe we wrote the first page of the book that's been in our head for a decade. And then we start to believe, oh, this might be possible. That evidence gives us the freedom to believe, to shift our limiting beliefs into something more positive. And then what do? We take more action, right? This is kind of an expanded version of my motivation momentum cycle. But we're taking the pieces out more specifically in that. And so when you do that, when you take that initial action, you take the walk, for example, your brain goes, oh, yeah, I'm that person who said I was going to take a walk and I did it. Or maybe you have a difficult conversation to have. And so you start it. And you say to yourself, I can do I can do hard things. We can do hard things. That's from Glennon Doyle. We can do hard things. This one's my favorite one. This idea of I'm going to spend 10 or 15 minutes to move whatever in my life that I want to move forward. Because who doesn't have 15 minutes in a day? Right? And again, if you're feeling resistance on this one, set a timer for 10 or 12 minutes. And 35 minutes later, you'll still be working on it. You'll turn off the timer and you'll think, oh, I can keep going. And what that says to your brain is, I can do this. I'm moving forward. I'm creating some outcome. I'm moving towards my results. And every time you give yourself that evidence, you start telling yourself a different story. You start shifting. Your life starts to change. That is momentum. That is momentum without the pressure. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about tips and tricks. Woo woo, tips and tricks. My favorite part. Okay, we'll see you in a minute. Are you finding yourself struggling in a relationship and wondering if you're dealing with a narcissist? You're not alone. And I've got a resource that can help. Get my 5 questions to confirm you're not the problem. This helps you identify the emotions associated with being in a controlling relationship. Just head over to locatecoaching.com/free gift and take the first step toward clarity and confidence in your relationships. Welcome back. Welcome back. It's time for my favorite part. Always my favorite part. Tips and tricks. Tips and tricks. Yay. Always my favorite part. All right. So my first tip is make your first step or your next step, depending upon which step you're on, ridiculously obvious. Right? Now, this might seem highly simplified, but I'm going to give you kind of a framework to think about it in terms of, and then I'll give you a couple of examples. So the framework is, what do I want to do? Let's see. I'm not in the middle. I'm nearing the end of writing a book. So we'll use writing a book as an example. So I want to write a book. I have an idea in my head. So what is the very first thing I need to do to write a book? Now, this wasn't at all the very first thing I did when I started my book. So I write an outline. Okay, that's my very first step. And I take that step and I spend 12 minutes to write an outline because I've been thinking about it. So I just brainstorm my outline, get it on paper. Now the framework is, that's the first step of the framework. Then what you do is you look around and you go, okay, I wrote my outline. All right, that felt pretty good. What's the very next step I do? Okay, well, I'm going to print the outline out and read it on paper. I'm so old school, totally aging myself. I'm going to edit it on paper and just see how it feels. So you take that step. Doesn't take too long. And you think, okay, you look around, you go, that went pretty well. All right, so you look around and you think, what am I going to do next? Well, I'm going to write the introduction. So your next step is you set a timer, you write whatever you're going to write that's within the introduction, right? And you finish that up, whatever that looks like, and you look around. You're starting to get the pattern here, the framework. You look around and you go, okay, that one all right. What went well? What could I do better? Well, what went well was I set my timer for 12 minutes and I wrote, and I was so into it that I turned the timer off and kept writing, and I got so engrossed in it that I ended up writing for 34 minutes. Okay, what could I do better? Well, I could, I could create an environment where starting writing is easier. So I'm adding this specifically because if you haven't heard this on one of my previous episodes, listen to gamma waves. I have never been more successful in getting into a creative mindset than turning on gamma waves. If you have Spotify, there is, and you search for gamma waves, 40 hertz to 100 hertz, there's a purple playlist. It's fantastic. Highly recommend it. You get the point. You take an action, you look around, you evaluate what went well, what can go better, you take the next step. Now, what this does is it allows you to not try to plan so far in advance and make something linear that isn't linear. Life is not linear. So stop trying to make something that you're trying to accomplish in your life linear, right? So what are some examples of this? Okay, I want to get healthier. What's my first step? I put my running shoes on and I walk around the block. Okay, I get home. What went well? Wow, it felt really good. What could have gone better? Next time I'll layer and make sure I have a sweatshirt as well. Right? Or here's another example. I want to grow my business. Right? Send an email. What went well? Well, people responded to this part. What could have worked better? I could have had a better hook. Right? And so, especially when we feel stuck, we need to chunk it down. And we need to create motivation and momentum, that cycle, by taking small steps, evaluating it, and deciding on the next step, right? We really tend to think, we're taught that we're going to start at point A and our goal's out there at point Q, and we're just going to take A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's not how life works. And often what we find is, yes, of course it's good to have goals. I'm the first person to say we should have goals and things that we want to focus on and accomplish. The reality is, though, holding that goal out there a little more lightly and understanding that it's not going to be completely linear, and that those markers that you've made to get towards that goal aren't going to look exactly like the markers you've put on paper. That creates success for us, because then we're more resilient. We understand there are going to be different obstacles, and we're addressing them as they happen instead of trying to waste our time and energy anticipating them, right? So make your next step ridiculously obvious. Create an environment where making your next step ridiculously obvious is easy to do. Another thing that we can do is we build habits, right? So we build habits so that the things that we do become automatic. Automaticity, that's actually a word. And because it becomes automatic, even when we're having a bad day, we don't feel good, we have a headache, we still put on our running shoes and walk around the block. Maybe we only walk around the block for 10 minutes or 12 minutes instead of 40, but we've got the habit of, I come home, I change my clothes, I put on my running shoes, I go out the door, right? So we can create kind of a minimum version of those things that we want to do for those times that we feel like we aren't fully in flow with the motivation and momentum cycle, right? And we can do this in any gazillion different ways, from professionally, personally, exercise, health, hobbies, projects. I mean, cleaning the house, right? I don't have to clean the whole house. I can just clean off and wipe down the kitchen counters, right? Have that minimum version of that habit on speed dial. I'm not really sure. Have it on speed dial. Y'all know what I mean. Okay. And one way to think about this, I heard about this concept a really long time ago, and it really, really stuck with me. I read it in a parenting book when my oldest was, man, a baby. And that was often, and I'm reframing it intentionally. So if you're the author of this concept, I sincerely apologize. When we can create a floor for ourselves, a foundation, instead of constantly striving for the ceiling. And so the idea in this parenting book was, as parents, if we create a floor for our kids, a minimum, then we help them build in success in their lives because they'll never fall below the floor. I hope that made sense. So instead of saying to yourself, as it relates to this topic about using momentum without putting pressure on ourselves, instead of saying to yourself, how much should I accomplish? How much am I going to accomplish? Instead, we can shift that to, what's the smallest amount I'm willing to consistently protect, right? I don't want you all focusing on the smallest amount. Well, I can be successful in life by only focusing on the smallest amount. Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, what is the smallest enough I'm willing to consistently protect? So what amount of time, what amount of money, what amount of eating vegetables? What's the smallest amount of that in any given window, whether it's a day or an hour or a week, whatever you're working towards? What's the smallest amount you're willing to do consistently, right? So, and you guys have heard me say this a million times. I follow Denise Duffield Thomas. She's a money mindset coach. And so, I could say, oh, my minimum is going to be saving $50 a week, right? If that feels like too much, save $5 a week. Every little bit that we do in our motivation and momentum cycle moves us forward. And the more consistently, it's like compounding, right? Like when we compound our money over time, we're compounding our actions. Another thing that we need to consider is to not confuse urgency with importance. So I can't remember. I'm completely at a loss for attributing things in this episode, and I apologize for that. There's a grid about not important, important, urgent, not urgent. And I want to say one of our former presidents did this, but that maybe isn't right. So don't quote me on that. And what so often happens is we do the urgent and not the important, right? And the reason why is because the urgent things are screaming at us constantly. The urgent things are always in front of our face. They're always screaming at us. And they're often have nothing to do with the thing that we find most important. And the important things in our lives are often the things that are whispering at us. And so as we can not confuse those two, and we can learn to decipher focusing and giving our attention and taking actions on the things that are most important to us, we can let some of those quote unquote urgent things go. I have one of my closest and oldest and dearest friends is an LA City fire captain. And I will be forever grateful to him for teaching me the difference between an emergency and not an emergency. I spent enough time around the firehouse to get a sense. And the reality is, I'm sorry to say, to myself, as well as to most of you out there, for the most part, there are very few of us that are living lives where there are truly emergencies in any given day. And for those of you out there that are, thank you so much to our first responders who are out there managing true emergencies all day, every day. You all know that I spent many years of my former career in real estate. There are no emergencies in real estate. No one's going to die if you don't close today or tomorrow or the next day. right? Yes, there are some things that are important. Yes, there are deadlines. No one's going to die. And when we can start to see our lives, no one's going to die if I don't get that email out right now. There's no emergency. And in most things in life, what that's allowed me to do is reframe that there are very few 811s and 711s and 611s, right? For the most part, most of us are living in a space where life is just not an emergency. And so when we're thinking about using motivation and momentum, really giving attention to the things that are important and not the things that are urgent. And I understand that my analogy might feel kind of odd because obviously 911s are also important. I hope you get the point that I'm trying to convey. Right? One of the next things that comes up a lot, and for those of you, I haven't talked about him a lot, but I follow Mark Manson as well. He's an exceptionally interesting guy. And I often don't agree with the things that he says. But he and his business partner, I don't know what title Drew has, but they put a ton of time and energy and research behind what they do. And I still don't always agree. In any case, one of the things that he's talked about in a previous podcast he did was when you're building habits and you're trying something new and you're growing and developing all that, you don't have to be enthusiastic about it. And in fact, you often don't have enthusiasm for something until you are kind of in the flow of that motivation momentum loop. So, follow your energy, follow what you want to lean into, but don't expect yourself to be enthusiastic every single day or around that thing. I have to tell you, I cannot, particularly right after I was in grad school, right after being done in grad school and I started this podcast, this is episode 85, probably a half of these episodes have been recorded at 4 a.m., where I've had to get up at 4 a.m. and come in and sit at my desk and record the episode. There's no enthusiasm for anything at 4 a.m., let me just tell you. And yet, it was important, and I wanted to show up, and I wanted to be consistent. And some of you who have been longtime listeners, thank you. But you've heard me sick. I had one episode 6 or 8 months ago. I had almost completely lost my voice, right? We follow the energy and we follow the commitment and we follow the dream and the drive, and we lean in, but we don't always have to be enthusiastic. And that's okay. That's okay. It's okay. Showing up matters. Along those lines, sometimes even the things that we really love or we really want to do can feel overwhelming, particularly in the beginning. And when that happens, we got to chunk it down. We got to chunk the bigger pieces of what we want to do down into smaller pieces so that we can take the next consistent action. So it's not, I don't think about, pardon me, we'll stick with this podcast example. I don't think, what are my podcasts going to look like for the next year? I mean, yes, sometimes I do that as a way to plan, but generally, while recording this episode, I'm not thinking about the episode that I'm going to produce and release, write and record and produce and release. And yes, there's a lot of steps to doing a podcast in January. I'm just not thinking about that. I'm thinking about this podcast right now. this episode. What value can I contribute in your lives in this episode? And certainly I'm not thinking about, oh, what are my podcast episodes or what's my podcast going to look like in 10 years or in 20 years, right? We sometimes inadvertently overwhelm ourselves. And so when that happens, chunk it down. What am I willing to do today? What can I do today? What can I do for the next 10 or 15 minutes? And I've said this how many times in this episode? And then set a timer. Set a timer for 10 or 12 minutes. Set a timer for 5 minutes. And what happens almost every time I've done that, what happens is I turn the timer off and I come back to it and I keep going. We can do that. We can increase our motivation and improve our momentum by thinking about what am I going to do for the next 10, 12, 15 minutes. I always know, kind of as a side note, I'm squirreling for a moment. And this episode's going to be exceptionally long, which was really interesting because when I planned this episode, I thought it would be very short. So maybe that's a good sign. My squirrel moment, though, is I often have to really keep myself on track because I have so many things in my life I want to do. And I know when I'm planning things in 15-minute increments, my schedule's too busy. So if you're someone like me out there and that kind of resonates with you, then setting the whole timer thing, adjust that accordingly in your own life. Because sometimes when you're living in 15-minute increments, it's harder to build in that extra project that you want to do. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so here's the deal. One of the things that at least most of the people I know, maybe there's a contingent of truly Pollyanna-ish people out there who don't have this issue. We often don't celebrate. We so often don't celebrate our successes. We don't celebrate the steps along the way. We're so driven to get to the goal that we just simply don't celebrate the moments along the way. And we certainly, generally speaking, don't celebrate the moments over our results, over the result that we're aiming for. And I think that's the case really, especially in the beginning of a project or something that we're trying to change or something we want to do. So don't wait. Please don't wait. Please stop and acknowledge yourself either at the steps that are causing you resistance, at the moments that feel more challenging, at the ones that felt so easy and therefore fantastic. Really acknowledge those. But celebrate your moments over waiting until you have the results. Because what's going to happen in that case is one, you're going to just completely increase your motivation and momentum cycle, right? When you celebrate, you're giving yourself dopamine hits, man, and your brain is going to love it. What you're doing on a bigger scale in those moments, though, is that you're actually shifting your limiting beliefs or removing them, hopefully, right? You're shifting your patterns. Notice, right? Instead of saying, I'm not going to celebrate until I don't know, my business is making 6 figures. Notice all of those things that you're doing, acknowledge yourself and celebrate the small steps along the way, because that's what allows us to shift our patterns, eliminate our limiting beliefs, and notice, hey, I really handled that differently. Oh man, I showed up in this way that I hadn't before. I really followed through this time. I made a choice that is in alignment with who I want to be, who I want to become, with that person who I will become when I'm doing this thing. That's where the change happens. That's where the change happens. So, what if you stopped believing that being hard on yourself is the reason you've accomplished everything that you've accomplished? You don't have to choose between pushing yourself relentlessly and doing nothing. Your life does not have to be lived at the extremes. Life is not black and white. It's shades and shades and shades of gray. There is an entire middle ground where you can be intentional and disciplined and ambitious and still treat yourself like what you're doing is this beautiful, amazing thing. You get to be a cheerleader for yourself. Momentum does not require pressure. It does not require pressure. It requires movement. It requires those tiny, consistent actions. We don't have to live our lives as if everything will stop when we take our foot off the gas. And really, in fact, the point is to discover that encouragement and clarity and consistency and choice are all better fuel sources than pressure. Remember, motivation and momentum and the cycle they create will get you so much further than the stress of pressure. And it definitely makes for a more peaceful, joyful, and successful outcome. Much better results. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if it hit home for you, I invite you to send it to someone else that might benefit from it. Or you could save it for the next time you feel kind of stuck and don't feel motivated or like you have momentum. Be a good one to revisit. If you're not already following the podcast, please make sure that you do so you don't miss what's coming next. And let me tell you with absolute certainty, you've got this. One thought, one choice, one action at a time. As we wrap up, here's the thing. I've made every mistake. I've literally been there and done that. It's one step at a time, and you'll get there. There's hope. You've got this. If you're struggling in a relationship and wondering if it might be controlling, you're not alone. Download my free PDF at locatecoaching.com/free gift to help you find clarity and confidence. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you soon.